Roar! Around 2,000 years ago, the Romans decided that dead men could be gods and living men could be sons of gods. Meanwhile, in the backwaters of the Roman Empire, the Jewish people were waiting for their god, Yahweh, to send a warrior king they called the Messiah to kick out the Romans. But the Messiah was a no-show. Eventually, several generations later, a small fringe Jewish sect said, "This is our guy." Jesus Christ, which means Saviour the Saviour, was a very Jewish Jew, but had two problems in his messianic resume. He had not defeated the Romans, and he was already dead. A few years later, Paul, who'd been busy beating up early Jesus worshippers, suddenly changed his mind and invented his own version of the Jesus sect. He reinvented the Messiah to be a superpowered celestial warrior king for non-Jews who could keep their foreskin and still get into heaven. The OG Christians weren't impressed. "This is fake news. Paul didn't even know Jesus. This is a Jews-only club, blah, blah, blah." According to Paul, Jesus spoke to him in visions, and any day now, JC would come down to earth with supernatural powers to defeat the Romans and anyone else who didn't worship him. Unfortunately, Jesus didn't return within Paul's lifetime, and despite writing lots of letters in his 30 years of missionary work, Paul never mentioned anything about Jesus' life, teachings, or miracles. But the Jews did get their war against the Romans, and got their butts badly kicked. No warrior king Messiah showed up, and their temple was torn down. The original disciples of Jesus were all dead, leaving not a single written record of what they thought about Jesus or his teachings. After the war, one of Paul's community did document some stories about Jesus, in which he appears as a human, but with superpowers and a big secret, who begs Yahweh not to let him be killed, but Yahweh ignored his prayers. Many other versions of the Jesus story were recorded over the next 100 years, none by actual eyewitnesses, or people who knew eyewitnesses, or people who knew people who, you get the idea. As time passed, these stories grew more far-fetched, suddenly including miracles like walking on water, the virgin birth, the resurrection of violent teenage Jesus, and Jesus raising people from the dead. All these authors were still certain that the Messiah would come to defeat their enemies within their lifetimes, but he still didn't come. For 300 years, various Jesus factions fought against the Romans, lions, and amongst themselves about who Jesus was and how to worship him properly, until one of these groups met with the Roman emperor and said, "Give us protection and tax breaks and we'll make you the head of our religion." "That's an offer I can't refuse," said the Emperor Constantine. And within 100 years, this group managed to take control of the entire empire. They burned competing gospels, tore down temples, killed pagan philosophers, and banned other religions, including competing versions of the Jesus Club. And that, my friends, is the slightly more accurate story